My name is Richard Calloway. I am 67 years old, and I have spent the last 38 years of my career as a forensic accountant. The kind of man who could look at a spreadsheet the way a doctor reads an x-ray, seeing every fracture, every hidden tumor, every lie told in the language of numbers. Last Thanksgiving, my son's wife stood at my dining room table, tore the deed to my property out of my hands, and told me I was no longer mentally capable of managing my own affairs. My son sat beside her and said nothing. I looked at them both, set down my fork, and excused myself to use the restroom. What I actually did was send a single text message to my attorney. It read, "Dinner is served. The guests took the bait." What they did not know, what none of them knew, was that I had been setting that table for 7 months. Let me take you back to April, when this whole thing began. I was in my home office, the one my late wife Carol had always called the war room because I kept it so obsessively organized. I was reviewing the quarterly filings of the Holloway Group, a small consultation firm my son Daniel had started 4 years ago with money I had lent him, money I never intended to collect. The phone rang. It was Daniel. His voice had a particular texture that afternoon, the kind of careful, rehearsed lightness a man uses when he is about to ask for something large. "Hey, Dad. Just checking in." "Daniel." I leaned back in my chair. "It's a Tuesday afternoon. You never call on Tuesdays." He laughed, a little too quickly. "Can't a guy just call his father?" "Of course he can," I said. "What is it?" There was a pause. I could hear him exhaling slowly, as if he were releasing the practiced version of what he was about to say and reaching for the real one. "Serena and I were talking. Her parents, Frank and Loretta, they've been having a rough go of it lately. The condo in Scottsdale, it fell through. Something with the financing. They're sort of between situations right now." "Between situations?" I repeated. "Yeah. And we were thinking, your place is big, Dad. Since Mom passed, it's just you rattling around in there. 4 bedrooms, the whole property. We thought maybe, just temporarily, Frank and Loretta could come and live here," I finished. Another pause. "Just until they get back on their feet. Serena's really worried about them." I let the silence sit for a moment. I did not say yes, and I did not say no. I said, "Let me think on it, son." And I told him I would see him at Thanksgiving, which was 7 months away. After I hung up, I sat very still in that room for a long time. Then I picked up the phone and called the only person I trusted completely. "Warren," I said, when my attorney Warren Holt answered, "We need to talk." Warren and I go back 22 years. He handled Carol's estate when she passed 3 years ago. He is the kind of lawyer who does not speak unless he has something precise to say, and when he does speak, judges listen. He met me for coffee the following morning, and I laid out everything I suspected. Frank and Loretta Givens. Serena's parents were not simply between situations. I had done some quiet checking the moment Daniel mentioned their name. Frank Givens had filed for personal bankruptcy 18 months prior, listing debts totaling just over $400,000 to a combination of private creditors and a failed restaurant venture in Phoenix. Loretta had resigned from her position at a financial advisory firm in Tempe under circumstances that were vague in the public record, but suggestive to someone who had spent 4 decades reading between those lines. The Scottsdale condo had not simply fallen through. It had been repossessed. More troubling was what I had found about Serena herself. My daughter-in-law had, over the past 8 months, made 3 separate inquiries through 3 separate attorneys regarding the legal process for establishing guardianship over an elderly parent, specifically regarding what level of cognitive assessment was required to declare a person legally incapable of managing their own financial affairs. She had done this quietly, through a screen of professional courtesy, but I had spent my career finding exactly these kinds of quiet things. "They're not asking to move in," I told Warren that morning over coffee. "They're establishing a foothold. Once Frank and Loretta are under my roof, the next step is a competency hearing. Serena gets guardianship, and then every account, every asset, every piece of property Carol and I built over 40 years becomes something they can manage." Warren was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "What do you want to do about it?" I stirred my coffee slowly. I want to let them think it's working. Over the next 7 months, I did 3 things. The first was financial. I spent 6 weeks with Warren restructuring every significant asset I owned. The house, the investments, the retirement accounts. Everything of real value was transferred into the Carol Calloway Irrevocable Trust, a vehicle that had existed in a limited form since Carol's passing, but which we now formalized and fortified. The trust had one executor, Warren, and one ultimate beneficiary, the Children's Literacy Foundation Carol had volunteered with for 11 years before she got sick. As far as the world Daniel and Serena could see, I had a checking account with enough money in it to appear comfortable, and a house that appeared to be solely in my name. The real picture was entirely different, and it existed nowhere they could find it. The second thing I did was install a complete surveillance system throughout my home. Not the consumer-grade cameras a nervous neighbor puts up over his garage. I hired a security firm out of Charlotte, a company I had used professionally twice before, and they installed 17 cameras covering every interior room and the full perimeter of the property. The feeds went to a secure, encrypted server that neither Daniel nor Serena nor anyone connected to them could access. Warren had the secondary credentials. Everything recorded, everything time-stamped. The third thing, and this is the part I want you to understand clearly, was the test. 32 years ago, I was the lead forensic investigator on a case involving a man who had embezzled just over $2 million from his employer over a period of 9 years. When we finally confronted him with the evidence, he wept. He said he had needed the money, that he had been in debt, that he had felt trapped and desperate, and that he had never intended for it to go so far. And I believed him. I believed that he was a fundamentally decent person who had made a catastrophic series of choices under pressure. Daniel is my son. He is 41 years old, and he is, at his core, a man I raised, to be honest. I needed to know whether what I was seeing was the real Daniel, a man willing to participate in stripping his own father's life, or whether it was a man being manipulated by a woman who had identified his financial Daniel vulnerability and was using it as a lever. So in September, 2 months before Thanksgiving, I did something that Daniel did not know about and that Warren advised me strongly against. The Holloway Group, Daniel's consulting firm, had a line of credit with a regional bank that was due for renewal. The bank had been sending signals that they were unlikely to extend it, given the firm's recent performance numbers. The line was for $180,000. Daniel had not told me about the problem. He would not have, because it would have required admitting that the business was struggling, and Daniel had always found that particular admission nearly impossible to make. I paid it, anonymously, through a structured intermediary that Warren helped me set up. The line of credit was renewed, quietly, with no fanfare. Daniel would have received a simple letter from the bank confirming the extension. He would have had no idea where the help came from, or that it came from me. I wanted to see what he would do with a clean start. What he did was show up at my door at Thanksgiving with Serena and her parents, a bottle of wine from a vineyard that cost more than my first car, and a manila folder inside his jacket that I noticed immediately but pretended not to. I had spent the 3 days before Thanksgiving doing exactly what a man approaching 68 does to prepare for a holiday dinner with family he loves. I cooked. I set the table with Carol's china, the set we had bought together on our 20th anniversary at an estate sale in Asheville. I put fresh flowers in the entryway. I made her cornbread stuffing from the handwritten recipe card she kept in the little wooden box above the stove. At 4:30 in the afternoon, I checked the system one final time. 17 cameras, active. The small digital recorder in the breast pocket of my button-down, active. The second phone, the one connected only to Warren, charged and in my inside jacket pocket. I put on the cardigan Carol had given me for my 65th birthday, the one she said made me look like a professor who had been somewhere interesting. And I went to the door. They arrived at 5, all 4 of them. Serena's parents stepped inside before Daniel had even fully knocked, their eyes moving across the entryway with a particular quality of attention that I recognized. They were not looking at my home the way guests look at a home. They were looking the way appraisers do. "Richard," Frank Givens said, gripping my hand with both of his, a gesture that always reads as warmth but functions as a hold. This place is something else. Every time I see it. This was the second time he had ever been in my house. Come in, I said, shuffling slightly, letting my posture be a few degrees older than it actually was. Not dramatically. Just enough. It's good to have the house full again. Loretta Givens went straight to the mantel above the fireplace where Carol's photograph sits, the one from our trip to the Blue Ridge 2 years before she got sick. Loretta picked it up without asking, turned it over in her hands. She was a beautiful woman, Loretta said, with a sympathy so practiced it had worn itself smooth. She was, I said, and I meant it entirely. Dinner was warm and deliberate. I had made everything from scratch, the way Carol taught me, and I sat at the head of the table and listened more than I spoke. I asked Frank about the restaurant business. I asked Loretta about her work vaguely, letting her fill in the details, noting what she left out. I watched Serena watch me the way a chess player watches a board, calculating. I watched Daniel not quite meet my eyes. The conversation arrived at the subject the way a river arrives at a dam. The current had always been heading there, but the moment of contact still carries a kind of shock. It was Serena who brought it up, her voice arranged in the key of gentle concern. Dad. She had started calling me that in the past year, a shift I had noted. We've been thinking, all of us, about next steps. For you, for the house. Next steps? I said pleasantly, reaching for the sweet potatoes. You've been here alone for 3 years, she continued. This property, it's a lot for one person. The upkeep alone. Daniel and I worry. I have a very good lawn service, I said. Frank cleared his throat. Richard, we want to be direct with you, because we respect you. He placed both palms flat on the table, a man stating terms. Loretta and I are looking at a transitional period. We'd like to be near family. And frankly, given the size of this place, it just makes sense for everyone. I looked at him. You'd like to move in here? Temporarily, Loretta added quickly. Daniel finally spoke. His voice was low, and he was looking at the tablecloth. Dad, it makes sense. You forget things sometimes. We've noticed. And with Serena's parents here, you'd always have someone around. It would be like having family close again. I forget things. I set down my fork very carefully. I looked at my son. What do I forget, Daniel? He shifted in his chair. Just things. Little things. You repeated yourself on the phone last month. You left the garage door open twice. I left the garage door open because I was carrying boxes to the car, and my hands were full, I said. What did I repeat on the phone? He didn't have an answer. Because there wasn't one. It had not happened. The room had changed temperature. Serena recognized it first. She reached into her handbag and placed a folder on the table next to my plate. We just want to be proactive, she said, her voice now carrying a new edge beneath the concern. We had someone look over the property, just to understand the options. I looked at the folder but did not open it. What kind of someone? I asked. A financial planner, she said. Someone who specializes in estate transitions. He thinks, given your age and given the size of the asset, that it might make more sense to simplify things. Maybe a smaller place. Something easier to manage. Sell the house, I said. It's a conversation, she said. Daniel said nothing. Frank Givens leaned forward. Richard, nobody is forcing anything. But this is a significant asset sitting here, and given the family situation, it just makes sense to think about how it could benefit everyone. Benefit everyone. I thought about Carol. I thought about the afternoon we signed the papers on this property, a Tuesday in October, 26 years ago, and how she had stood in the empty living room and turned slowly in a circle with her arms out, and I had known right then that this was where we would spend the rest of our lives. I thought about the marks on the kitchen doorframe where we had measured Daniel's height from age 4 to age 16. I thought about the chair by the window where she used to read in the mornings, the one I still have not moved. A cold, clean feeling settled over me. Not anger, something more focused than anger. I picked up the folder and opened it. It was exactly what I expected, a preliminary valuation of the property, a summary of what a voluntary estate transition would look like. And on the third page, printed on the letterhead of a law firm I did not recognize, a brief overview of the process by which a family member could petition for guardianship over a parent showing signs of cognitive decline. They had brought the paperwork to my Thanksgiving table. I closed the folder. I placed it back down. "This is very thorough," I said. Serena smiled, a careful, relieved smile. She thought the old man was going to comply. I excused myself to use the restroom. I walked down the hallway, past Carol's reading corner, past the kitchen door frame with its 26 pencil marks. I took out the second phone. I typed a message to Warren. 4 words and a period. "Dinner is served. Bait taken." I put the phone back in my pocket. I stood at the bathroom sink for a moment and looked at my reflection. 67 years old. 38 years of looking at numbers until they told me the truth. Carol's cardigan. A house that was never going to belong to anyone I had not chosen. I went back to the table. I sat down. I looked at all 4 of them. Frank with his planted palms, Loretta with her practiced sympathy, Serena with her folder and her calculations, and Daniel, my son, who was still studying the tablecloth. "I want to be clear about something," I said. My voice was calm. I was not performing calm. I simply was calm, the way a man is calm when he has been preparing for a moment for 7 months. This house belongs to me. What happens to it when I am gone is a matter I have already arranged, and that arrangement does not involve any of you making decisions on my behalf. I am not confused. I do not forget things, and I am not in need of management. Serena's smile did not exactly disappear. It reconfigured. "Richard, I'm not finished," I said. "Frank, the valuation in that folder was done by a firm that has a referral relationship with the guardianship attorney, whose letterhead is on page 3. That is not a neutral third party. That is a coordinated approach." I looked at him steadily. I spent 38 years catching exactly this kind of arrangement. The table was very quiet. Loretta's hand moved slightly toward her water glass. Daniel looked up from the tablecloth for the first time all evening. "What I would like," I continued, "is for all of you to finish your meal and then go home. I am going to need some time to think about the nature of this family, and I think you all need some time to think about the choices you have made tonight." Serena stood up. When she did, something in her shifted. The measured, strategic woman fell away, and what replaced her was something angrier and more honest. "You're making a mistake," she said. "You're a 67-year-old man living alone in a 4-bedroom house, and you think you have it all figured out. You don't." She placed both hands on the table and leaned toward me. "You need us, whether you want to admit it or not. You need people around you, and the only people who are willing to help you are sitting at this table. So, you can either be smart about this, or you can be stubborn and end up in a state facility in 5 years when you actually can't manage it anymore." "Serena?" Daniel said. "Just her name, nothing else." Frank said, "Honey, no." She reached across and picked up the folder from in front of me. She held it up. "This is not a threat. This is a plan. We had an attorney draw up the petition. We have documentation of the incidents Daniel mentioned. We have 2 statements from people who have observed your behavior recently. This can go the easy way, where we sit down and make this work for everyone, or it can go to a hearing, where a judge decides whether you're capable of making these decisions yourself." She set the folder back down in front of me. "I'd prefer the easy way. Wouldn't you?" The room was absolutely still. I looked at the folder. I looked at Serena. I looked at my son, who had not said a word to stop his wife from delivering that speech, and who would not meet my eyes. Then I picked up the folder, and I tore it in half. It was not a dramatic gesture. It was a precise one. I tore it carefully, evenly, the way a man tears something he intends to be done with. I set both halves beside my plate. "Get out of my house," I said. Serena laughed, a short disbelieving sound. "You can't just—" "I can," I said. "This is my house. You are my guests, and I am withdrawing the invitation. I want all 4 of you to leave now, please." Frank stood up, his face red, his composure entirely gone. "You're making a very serious error in judgment, Richard. We have legal standing here. You cannot simply—" "Frank." I turned to him. You filed for personal bankruptcy 14 months ago. You listed among your creditors a Mr. Gerald Santini, who operates a private lending business in Tempe under 2 different business names, neither of which are registered properly with the state of Arizona. I know what a private creditor of that profile means. I know what it means that you listed the debt but not the full arrangement. I held his gaze. I have 38 years of knowing what it means. His face went the color of old ash. Get out, I said again. They left. Loretta took her coat from the hook by the door without being asked. Frank walked ahead of her without speaking. Serena paused in the doorway and looked back at me with an expression that was 1 part hatred and 2 parts the particular humiliation of a person who has just realized they severely miscalculated their opponent. Daniel was the last one. He stopped in the hallway, his hand on the door frame, and he looked at me the way he used to when he was 8 years old and had done something he knew was wrong and was trying to figure out if I knew it too. Dad, he said. Go home, Daniel, I said. I'll call you. He left. I cleared the table. I washed Carol's china myself, by hand, the way she had always insisted. I put the cornbread stuffing away in a glass container. I stood at the kitchen sink looking out at the backyard in the dark, at the oak tree Carol planted from a sapling 17 years ago, and I let myself feel the weight of what had just happened. Then I dried my hands, went to my desk, and sent Warren the second message. Phase 2. They will make a move in the next 72 hours. Be ready. He was. They were. 41 hours after Thanksgiving dinner, Serena filed a petition in Mecklenburg County for emergency guardianship review, citing documented evidence of cognitive decline in her father-in-law, Richard Calloway, age 67. She submitted with the petition 2 signed witness affidavits, a letter from a clinical psychologist named Dr. Fenn, a man whose state license had been under administrative review for billing irregularities for 11 months, and a summary of financial decisions she characterized as erratic, including the fact that I had recently closed several investment accounts. Those accounts had been closed 7 months earlier as part of the restructuring Warren and I had done. They had been rolled into the trust. This was not erratic. It was meticulous. But she did not know that. She also did not know that Warren had been tracking the preparation of that petition for 3 weeks, because one of the attorneys she had consulted in September, the third one, who had provided the most detailed guidance on the guardianship process, had since become a cooperating witness for our legal team. He had provided Warren with the full documentation of his consultations with Serena, including her own handwritten notes from their meeting. A guardianship petition is a public legal proceeding. It generates a record, and the record Serena had created across 3 separate attorney consultations, a coordinated financial valuation, falsified witness affidavits, and a letter from a psychologist whose credibility was already compromised, was not a petition. It was evidence. Warren filed our response the same afternoon her petition was submitted. I will not walk you through every detail of what followed in the legal proceedings, because legal proceedings have a pace that does not make for good dinner conversation. What I will tell you is that the judge assigned to the guardianship hearing was a woman named Judge Patricia Osei, who had spent 14 years on the family court bench and who, Warren told me, had presided over 19 guardianship cases and reversed 11 petitions she had found to be filed in bad faith. She had no patience for the kind of petitions Serena had filed. At the preliminary hearing, Warren submitted 3 things. The first was the surveillance footage from my home. Not the Thanksgiving dinner. I had not needed it to go that far. What he submitted was footage from 2 occasions in October when Serena had come to visit me unannounced, ostensibly to check in, during which she had searched my office while I was in the kitchen making her tea, and during which she had photographed documents on my desk with her phone, documents I had placed there deliberately. Documents that appeared to be financial statements but which contained figures I had altered, a version of my accounts that reflected only the surface layer, the checking account, the modest visible holdings, and none of the real structure beneath. She had stolen fabricated evidence, and I had it on camera. The second thing Warren submitted was the documentation of Dr. Fenn's license review, along with 3 prior cases in which he had provided guardianship assessment letters that had subsequently been overturned. He had a pattern, The letter he submitted on Serena's behalf described observations he could not have made during appointments that had never occurred, because I had never met the man. The third thing was the recording from the Thanksgiving dinner itself. Every word. My voice and Serena's, both clear, including the moment she said, "We have a petition. We have documentation. This can go to a hearing where a judge decides whether you're capable." Judge Osei dismissed the petition within the hour. She then asked Warren whether his client intended to pursue further action. Warren looked at me. I thought about the credit line I had paid, the clean start I had given Daniel. I thought about an 8-year-old boy who used to drag me out of bed on Saturday mornings to watch cartoons and who had grown into a man I did not fully recognize, but who was still, under all of it, my son. I told Warren that I wanted to speak to Daniel alone before we decided anything. We met at a coffee shop near his office, 3 days after the hearing. He came in looking like a man who had not slept since Thanksgiving. He sat down across from me and did not pretend that any version of what had happened was acceptable. "I didn't know about the petition," he said. "I need you to know that. I knew she was talking to attorneys. I told her to stop. She didn't stop." "You knew she was planning to have me declared incompetent," I said. "I thought it was leverage. I thought she was just using it as a possibility, not something she'd actually file." He looked at his hands. "I was wrong." "You were wrong about a great many things," I said, "starting with the folder you brought to my table." He didn't argue with that. I looked at my son for a long time. The boy in him is still visible if you know where to look. It lives around his eyes and in the way he holds his shoulders when he is ashamed of himself. A particular tightening that he has had since he was 12 years old. "The line of credit," I said. "The one on the Holloway group." He went still. "I know you received the renewal letter in September," I said. "I know you were surprised by it. I know you probably thought the bank changed its mind." "Dad." "I paid it," I said. "I structured it through an intermediary so you would not know. I wanted to give you a clean slate, Daniel. I wanted to take the financial pressure off and see what you did when the pressure was gone." I held his gaze. "And what you did was show up at my Thanksgiving table with a valuation of my house and a guardianship petition." The sound he made was not crying. Not exactly. It was the sound of something large and load-bearing giving way. "I'm sorry," he said. And I believed him. Not because the apology erased anything, but because I know my son's voice, and there was nothing left in it that was calculated or strategic. It was just the sound of a man who had looked at what he had done and found it unbearable. "I know you are," I said. I told him what was going to happen. Warren was pursuing a formal complaint against Dr. Fenn with the state medical board that would proceed regardless. The two individuals who had signed the false affidavits had already been contacted by Warren and had, facing potential perjury exposure, retracted their statements in writing. Serena was facing a filing with the state bar against the attorney she had retained for the petition, who had assisted in the submission of documentation he knew to be misleading. As for Serena's parents, Frank Givens had a separate problem. The creditor he had improperly listed in his bankruptcy, Gerald Santini, had been the subject of a state investigation into predatory lending practices for the past 8 months. Warren had, quietly, provided the investigating office with the documentation I had gathered regarding Frank's arrangement. That was not my war, but I had pointed the appropriate people toward the right battlefield. "What about us?" Daniel said. It was barely a question. "That depends on you," I said. "Not on Serena. On you." What I told him was this. The trust was structured. The house was protected. The assets were secure. Nothing they had attempted could touch any of it, and nothing anyone attempted in the future would be able to either. When I pass, everything goes to Carol's foundation. That decision is made and it is permanent. Daniel had, 5 years ago, he did not know this, yet been included in my estate planning in a separate, modest provision that I had established before any of this began. Not the house, not the bulk of the investments, but something. A recognition that he was my son, and that whatever he had done, I had not stopped loving him. I told him I was keeping that provision in place. He looked at me like a man who did not know he deserved anything and was being offered something anyway. "Why?" he said. "Because your mother would have," I said, "and because I am choosing to be the man she believed I was, rather than the man this situation tried to make me." That was 11 months ago. I am sitting now in the chair by the window, Carol's chair, with the morning coming in through the east-facing glass, the way it has every morning for 26 years. The oak tree in the backyard is losing its leaves. The house is quiet, in the way that only a house you have protected can be quiet, a settled silence rather than an empty one. Serena and Daniel are separated. He is living in an apartment near his office. He calls me on Sundays. The conversations are short and careful, like two people learning to walk on a surface that cracked and healed and is solid again, but neither of them quite trusts yet. I think that is honest. I think honesty is the right place to start. Frank and Loretta Givens are dealing with consequences I did not create and did not need to arrange. Those were always coming. I simply declined to be the thing that protected them from arriving. Dr. Fenn's license was suspended 4 months after the hearing. The attorney Serena retained received a formal reprimand from the state bar and is under continued review. Warren and I have spent the past 6 months building something new. We are calling it the Callaway Resource Center, a nonprofit that provides free legal consultation to seniors facing financial exploitation or bad faith guardianship actions. We partnered with 2 advocacy organizations in Charlotte and 1 in Asheville, and last month we helped a 72-year-old man in Gaston County stop his nephew from liquidating his savings under a power of attorney that had been obtained through coercion. His name is Harold. He called Warren's office crying. He said he did not know there was anyone who would help someone like him. There is, Harold. There is now. I think about Carol often more than I did before all of this, which I would not have thought possible. I think she would have found the whole thing both deeply painful and, in its outcome, deeply satisfying. She had a clear eye for people. She saw Serena coming before I did. If I am being honest with myself, she said to me once, 2 years before she passed, sitting right here in this chair, "Richard, the people who love you will never try to make you smaller." I did not know then exactly who she meant. I know now. The scar this left is not a visible one. It lives in the knowledge that the people you raised can make choices that break your heart, and that you can survive that, and that surviving it does not require you to stop loving them. It only requires that you refuse to mistake your love for a weakness that others can use against you. Carol used to say that a house is not wood and plaster and square footage. A house is the sum of the decisions made inside it. Every meal cooked, every argument resolved, every morning spent in a good chair with good light coming through a clean window. I fought for this house, but what I was really fighting for was the right to go on making good decisions inside it for whatever years I have left, without anyone else's hand on the wheel. Nobody gets to take that from you without your permission. Not a son, not a daughter-in-law, not a bankruptcy fraudster in a suit that smells like other people's money. And if they try, if they sit at your table and tell you that your age is a vulnerability, they intend to exploit you, look at them calmly. You excuse yourself to the restroom, and you send your attorney 4 words. The rest will follow. What would you have done differently? Let me know in the comments below. And if this story meant something to you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Stories like this don't just happen to other people. They happen to all of us.